Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove.
Well, good afternoon, and welcome to Afternoons on the Dove. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and today is a very, very special day on the program because we have with us today Hal Short. He's the international president of United Christian Broadcasters International. He travels around the world 2 to 3 times a year, and at least twice a year he's here in Medford, and today is one of those visits. And Hal, what a delight to have you in the studio.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Good to be here. You're on your way from New Zealand to here, to Canada, to France, to Estonia, and to the UK, and back home.
Yeah, more or less.
Oh, no, you're going to have Denmark in there somewhere.
Well, that's right. Absolutely.
All right. Great to have you with us. Well, I'm delighted you're here because I want our audience to get to know more about United Christian Broadcasters International. They hear us talking about it almost daily on the air. And we've been a happy part of the family for, 7, 8 years now. We're pretty delighted about that. And let's kind of go back because you are one of the founding members of the organization back in New Zealand looking for some kind of airtime on radio somewhere, someplace, somehow. And how long ago was that?
Well, the vision for Christian broadcasting in New Zealand goes back 50 years. The founder of what we know as the Rema Broadcasting Group in New Zealand, when he was a young man, 20 years old, was given a vision to establish Christian radio in that country. And we were the first in the British Commonwealth to have Christian radio. The idea of Christian radio owned by Christians was just unthinkable because it was all state radio at that stage. And so it goes back a long way. But it took until 1978 before we got our first permanent license. Prior to that, we were allowed test broadcasts. The very first broadcast we had was one day out of a mobile studio.
Really?
We were allowed 100 watts, medium wave, and that was it, 18 hours. And
I think we have a picture of that mobile studio. Up
Absolutely.
And that was it?
That was it.
Wow.
And then 12 months later, we were allowed another one-day broadcast, 18 hours. We were not allowed to have anything pre-recorded. It all had to be live. The first broadcast was in the city of Christchurch, where they've had the big earthquakes.
Yeah.
The second broadcast was in the city of Wellington. I was involved in running that broadcast. And this was how tough it was.
Wow.
And we weren't even allowed to broadcast to people who were not supporters.
I just separate them.
Good question. I actually asked that. I was very tempted to ask that question of the Minister of Broadcasting at the time.
Yeah.
But we gradually gathered more support. We had more test broadcasts. And eventually we came to air in November 1978. Been broadcasting full-time since then. And back then, when we first went to air, we were only allowed 6 hours a day because everybody was a volunteer, home missionary, supported by people who believed in what we were doing.
Wow.
We were allowed 6 hours a day during the week and 18 hours on the weekend and public holidays.
Wow.
Today, that ministry today, which is now known as the Rema Broadcasting Group, is the 4th largest broadcaster in the country.
Wow.
And all I can say is, that's God.
That's God.
That's God.
Now, out of that, you have come from a daytime station to where you have, 3 networks now? Three different formats?
Yes, they have 3 formats. We have a youth station, family station, and a station for older listeners. Plus, we have a television channel.
Shine TV.
Shine TV, which is the counterpart of the Dove TV.
Yeah. And that covers the whole nation of New Zealand, both islands. And how many outlets? 60-something outlets? 70-something?
About 70, yes.
Wow.
I lose track. But I think the key thing is that out of that, what began in New Zealand has grown something worldwide.
Well, when did the international vision come to light? Because first of all, it was a vision to reach New Zealand.
Correct.
When did it become international vision?
Back in the early 1980s, we had people coming to us from overseas who said, "We see what God is doing here. We would like to have that in our country."
Wow.
And so out of that, Richard Berry, who was the founder of Rema, myself, and the other vice president, Frank Salisbury, there were 3 of us, co-founded what is known today as United Christian Broadcasters. And we set up a separate structure because we recognized that we needed a different structure to work internationally. And what we did is we set up a structure where each country would have an autonomous affiliate linked to a central body, but each country is autonomous. And we are a fellowship of like-minded Christian broadcasters with the same core values, vision and mission to reach our nations with the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's just wonderful. So out of that, what was your first outlet outside of New Zealand? Where did you go to work first?
Australia would be the first. And we began there. We actually set up in Australia in a lot of regional towns, small community stations. And then later in years, we became a broadcaster in our own right, working under what we call the Vision Network. And today, actually last week, Vision Radio established its 500th station.
That's 500 radio stations.
Exactly. Across the whole of Australia.
The whole continent, yeah.
Now, a lot of those stations are very small. They're little low-powered stations. But you're talking about small towns, maybe of just a few thousand people, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people in the outback somewhere. And you are the only Christian radio station. Well, you are the only radio station in that town.
Wow.
And living sometimes in those places is extremely hard.
Yeah.
And it's very hard for us to appreciate what it's like living in a small town in outback Australia. And I can just say the value of those stations is huge.
Oh, I can't imagine running 500 radio stations, but I've seen the map that you and our colleague Ian Warby there that has. When you see all of the dots on the map throughout the entire country of Australia, it is stunning.
Yeah.
It is stunning and still growing.
Still growing.
Still growing. All right, so out of that, a lot of folks know my story with Bob Gass. Now, I'll claim that sometimes. But Bob Gass was a young evangelist preaching one of his very first revivals in the United States in Peggy's dad's church. And the first night on that first revival is when I became a Christian. And he and I have been friends ever since. So I knew him before you did. And that's amazing how God weaves all that together. But you bumped into Bob Gass quite a few years ago, and he saw the vision of what you were doing, and he offered you this devotional that he was writing.
We like to tell him that you were his first and only convert.
Well, I tell him that when I introduce him. I said, I'm your first and only American convert. It's been downhill since then.
Way back in the 80s, as you know, Bob came out of Northern Ireland. He came to the US when he was 18 years of age. He still has a real heart for that part of the world. And he heard through another source that we were doing some work in the UK. And so he made contact with us and we met up. And in those days, he had this devotional, The Word for Today. And it was only a small circulation to his own supporters. And he said, look, I'd like you to, if you want it, it's free, it's available for you to use as part of your outreach. And we began using the Word for Today with UCB in the UK. And I think at that stage we had something like 3,000 members on our database. Today we have something like 500,000. We print something like 1 million copies of the Word for Today in the UK. Actually, we have the UCB has the worldwide rights to print and publish the Word for Today outside of the US. And today we do several million copies of the Word for Today in several languages around the globe. And it's something, it's amazing really, because people say the same thing, and it doesn't matter what language. It doesn't matter whether it's the edition that you and I might be reading or one that has been printed in another language, might be a few months old. People say the same thing. I opened up this devotional, I read it, and it was a word, an inspired spoken word, a rhema for me today, where I am. And I just want to say thank you, because the Lord used this to minister into my life. And we hear that time and time again. Yeah,
and how many are now being printed worldwide?
Several million.
Several million.
Several million. I'm not sure, because it goes up and down. But it's printed in Spanish, Portuguese. We have it in South America, in Portugal. We have it
Brazil.
We have it in Estonia. Danish, Norwegian. We have it, I think, Hungarian.
Wow.
It's also in Albanian, I believe. There's several languages. I lose track.
Wow. We're talking to Hal Short today. Hal is the president of United Christian Broadcasters International, and he's here in the Rogue Valley twice a year. Of course, he sits on our board, and we've been affiliate with United Christian Broadcasters now going on 7 or 8 years. I lost track of it. But the goal is to reach the world with the gospel. And really, we have become, in some ways, the only gospel message that people hear through the media. And in some ways, we're missionaries in the media of this sea of choices that people have. At least that's how we look at it here in America. All of a sudden, you sit down and look at a satellite channel, and you'll have 160, 70, 200 channels to look from or to choose from. We hope to be the oasis in the middle of that, and that's our goal. Hal, let's come back to the world vision, because this is an interesting thing. We have watched going from a little station. Was your first station FM?
No, it was AM.
AM.
We were only allowed medium wave in the early days.
Okay, because our first station here was a daytime AM. I remember going down and turning the transmitter on at daybreak and turning it off at sunset. You remember those days?
Yes, I do.
And then FM comes into the picture, and but now we're in the digital age. Did you ever think we'd be seeing all of this technology erupt the way it has?
No, life was a lot simpler back in those days.
Yeah.
We had different problems, but it seemed a lot simpler. I mean, today, what you're seeing now is this whole plethora of platforms. Whether it's just straight internet, you've got web radio, you've got digital platforms. Like in the UK, we broadcast in Britain, we broadcast on digital audio, so it's terrestrial digital. We have all these different web apps and that now. We find there's a dozen different ways of reaching people, and our challenge today is trying to be where those people are, and it's a big challenge. And we recognise that what we've done in the past has to change, and it's not easy, because basically you're seeing fragmentation. In the old days, media organisations controlled the airwaves.
Big ones.
The big ones did.
Yeah.
But that's changing. What's happening now, the telcos are ones that are controlling the airwaves. And so you're finding it's a whole different way of looking at it. We are becoming content providers. And it's about narrowcasting rather than broadcasting. And also the whole thing with social media, where we've got to interact. In the past, I could sit behind this microphone and tell you what you ought to be thinking. Today, the people out there don't want that. They actually want to tell you what they're thinking. And so it's a whole different dynamic. And so it raises new opportunities as well as new challenges.
Wow. Let me take a break. We'll be right back. Hal Short's with us today. Hal is the president of United Christian Broadcasters International, and he's here on a visit on one of his worldwide tours. And we have a lot more to talk about, how God is using the media to reach millions of people around the world. We'll be right back.
Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove. Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove.
We're back, and our special guest today is Mr. Hal Short. He's the president of United Christian Broadcasters International, and twice a year here, he's here at least twice a year here in the Rogue Valley, as we are also one of the affiliates of United Christian Broadcasters, of broadcasters around the world, trying our best to reach as many people as we can with the gospel of Christ. And some of the things we talked about, I want to hold this up to the camera. This is the latest edition of the Word for You today. In fact, it's in the mail, and those of you watching on TV, you're a supporter, you'll be getting yours in the mail here probably today. And we're now printing several million of these worldwide.
Yes.
And this is an incredible tool. One of the biggest response we get out of this, Hal, is, how did he know to write that for me today? I mean, that's the biggest comment we get. It's an amazing tool. It's an amazing.
Bob asked himself that one as well.
Yeah, when in fact he wrote these probably months ago. iPhones, smartphones. We're broadcasting on there. In fact, if you push this little button here and it comes up, you can watch the Dove TV and listen to the Dove radio right here on the iPhone. It's an amazing thing. Now these things, this is going to be the game changer. I'll hold this up the camera. A lot of folks have seen one of these, the iPad. Can you believe what this is doing?
Oh, I can. I've got one myself.
Okay, and I can sit here and I can watch the Dove TV on this. Look at that. We got it. Look at there. You are.
There we go.
We are live on the iPad while we're live on the air.
It's not an ad for Apple.
Well, I don't know. We've got to talk to Steve Jobs and get a commission on this. But I mean, this is the technology that God has dropped in our hands. It's exploded. Absolutely exploded. You and I were talking before we went on the air about internet stations in various languages. Is this where the future is?
Absolutely. I think a few years, well, it's not that many years ago, when Christians were afraid to use the media. We were discouraged, I think, from being involved in the media.
Well, it seemed worldly,
Yeah.
I guess, you know.
But I have to say, today, the media, the marketplace is the media. The media is the marketplace. The media is where people are at. They're using their smartphones. They're using their iPads. They're using their their computers. We have to go where the people are. If we want to reach people with the gospel of Christ, we have to go where they are. And it's interesting. You go to countries. If you go into Asia, you go to China, for example. You go to places like Beijing, and you will find you'll be amazed at the number of people that are walking around with smartphones. The number of people that have iPads and the like. People are connected. The world is connected. There is a drive to get us connected globally. Even in my country, they're looking at high-speed broadband. They're installing it now. They want us connected. And so we as believers need to be.
We need to be in the middle of that.
We need to be in the middle of that.
We need to be in the middle. I really believe we are what they call media missionaries. Let me just give a rundown, see if I have all this correct. And some of the places that United Christian Broadcasters is involved in: the Philippines, South Africa, the UK, Estonia, Australia, France, Canada, Denmark. You have Shine TV in New Zealand, the U Channel in Indonesia, which I want you to talk about in just a moment, UCB television throughout the entire UK, and may I mention the Dove TV right here. This is remarkable coverage, and it's growing every day. I'd like for you to just take a second, because we were there in Jakarta, Indonesia, when they switched satellites. We were there shortly after they switched satellites. And I was stunned to hear the number, 4+ billion people they're reaching with that satellite. It's an amazing story.
And the interesting thing is that Indonesia is the world's largest Muslim country.
Right.
And there's a huge potential there for the gospel. And that station, as you say, has gone onto satellite. It covers that whole region of Southeast Asia. Huge coverage.
And the response has been phenomenal.
A phenomenal response. And they're only scratching the surface. In the Philippines, we have a great team there in Manila. And they work, whereas Indonesia works with satellite, with television, the Philippines has been working with radio. And so Ron Titular, who manages the station, Chuck Quinley is the CEO. They are on FM radio.
That's Ron and Chuck.
Ron and Chuck there.
They're on the screen.
Yeah.
Yep.
Ron's an old rock jock from way back on commercial radio. But those guys are really reaching the young people. The average age of a Filipino in Manila is like 20-something. They are connected. And so the whole emphasis there is to reach the youth. So they're doing a lot of FM radio work, not in different parts of the country. Places like Mindanao, which is a high Islamic area. You often hear Mindanao mentioned in the news for terrorist activities. They're also doing a lot of stuff online, and they find the social media thing is really impacting young people. So they're looking at different ways of reaching their community.
It's a fine line, Hal, between the mission of reaching people and then the business of reaching people.
Yeah.
You and I sometimes get wrapped up in balance sheets and P&Ls, and we get wrapped up in technical things and all the things going on. At the end of the day, it's reaching people with the gospel message and the miracle that takes place in somebody's heart. The scripture that has now become a new foundational word for me is Romans 10:20. It's also found in Isaiah 65, and it says this: I was found by those who weren't seeking me, and I manifested myself to those who didn't ask.
Yes.
And that's the miracle testimony that we get from the radio and the television. They are not even looking for God, and they're coming across the channel, and they find him. And while they're listening or watching, he manifests himself, and they didn't even ask for him to do that. I mean, that's the miracle of what we're dealing with today. And I'm sure you probably got thousands of stories of changed lives, but the bottom line, that's what we're doing.
You hear that in all the groups, different countries, cultures. I mean, we are working in Estonia, been working in Estonia for some years, and it's a small station, FM station. They have no AM there. When the Russians moved out, they had to start the whole thing again, and they started with FM. They did a technology jump, and they're broadcasting off about 4 transmitters, cover about 60% of the country.
That's the picture of them in Estonia?
In Estonia, in the studio.
Yeah.
And, you find that the needs in places like that are identical to those, say, in Denmark, which is quite different. It's people are people. It doesn't matter what the language, it doesn't matter what the culture. People have needs.
Do you sense an acceleration of urgency to reach more quicker? I mean, is God dropped this technology in our heart to use it now or to think about it? I mean, I realize that's a leading question, but I just sense this push on my back, do more, reach more, reach more. And I'm kind of going, oh, man.
Well, yes, I don't know if I need more.
My plate's full, you know.
Well, I look at the way we used to do it. You see, we used to go into a country, build up support, say whether it's Denmark or Africa or those places, and you build up some support. You get a license, you get a station, you get on air, and you broadcast on FM or whatever is available. I think that is changing. We have to. There is a sense, and I look at what's happening in the world. The opportunities are there now, and there is that sense that we must be more proactive in terms of getting out into these large populations, large communities. For example, through the digital platforms, we can move into China without actually going into the country. We can go into India, Pakistan. We can go to any country without actually having to go through that process that we went. What we sometimes refer to as the old analog process,
right,
of establishing an FM or an AM station.
Just putting up an internet station.
Yes.
Yeah.
You set up an internet station and instantly you can be in that country literally reaching millions of people. I found it interesting that there's another organisation that I know that work in Africa and in Asia. They had a high-powered shortwave station in Australia beaming into China and those places. They shut it down end of last year, and they went on to doing YouTube clips, 60 to 90-second clips. Mm-hmm. And I think they now get 10 times the response they do now than what they did when they were on shortwave.
You know, that's I want to deal with the social media phenomenon because it is just absolutely mind-boggling. But part of this success of social media and the new digital platform is it's forcing whatever content we put on there, the feature of that, shorter lengths.
Yeah.
And we're not used to that. We're old boys. We like to hear hour sermons, but not the case anymore.
No, and that is the challenge: is being able to provide something succinct that people can grasp, and very often they can grasp one point, and that's it. They don't want a long sermon. There's after some little nugget which will resonate with them. And how you do that is a challenge because it's easy, as you say, to speak and preach something, a long sermon or have a long message. But when you have to compress it down into 90 seconds or whatever, that takes a bit of skill.
Before we go to the break, let me ask you to come back to the DAB issue in the UK. I don't know if that'll ever make it to the United States. I think the commercial broadcasting industry may not allow that, but you never know. But there, it seems like the whole country is wired of what you call terrestrial digital broadcasting. So these light posts out there have these little transmitters on it that people are getting a digital frequency in their car.
DAB has taken years to get established in the UK. And you're right, one of the things that stops it in some countries are the commercial broadcasters who say, why would I want to spend millions going to digital at no extra improvement to my bottom line? And that's the problem, is that it costs them money to go into another platform, but it's not going to increase their profitability.
Right.
Whereas the internet platforms that are coming in are not run by broadcasters, they're run by telcos, internet companies and the like. And so it bypasses the broadcasters and we have to get on board with those people rather than the other way around. But DAB has finally reached a tipping point in the UK. It is the radio platform for the foreseeable future.
Right.
But I think what will happen, there are other digital platforms like DRM, Digital Radio Mondial. DAB, the digital audio, has limitations in that it's line of sight. See, Australia has adopted two systems. They said in the cities we'll have DAB, line of sight. We'll have to go to Digital Radio Mondial for the country.
On the bush.
It's like AM out in digital AM.
Right.
But I think the thing that will supersede all of that eventually will be wireless. Things are changing so fast. We don't know what the world's going to look like in 5 years from now.
Well, you know, here in the United States, we're now beginning to, and I know Europe's already dealing with it, basically on-demand video, on-demand television. And a lot of people said, why are you starting another Christian television in America? And I think that was a legitimate question when we looked at putting the Dove TV on the air. But we also knew that we had at our fingertips some very unique broadcasting or programming that you don't see anywhere else. And we were going to arrange those programs in the lifestyle of an American, say, somewhere between the age of 35 and 45. And it's working. But we may be going to where all of a sudden you don't need a TV antenna. You may not even need a cable system. You just need wireless access, and you can plug anything you want to watch it when you want to watch it.
Well, if I take my iPad, I mean, I can watch anything I want anywhere on my iPad. It may cost me, but I can do it. It's early days yet. And if you have a look at what's happening now, that in what they are really trying, what governments are doing now is going to high-speed broadband. If you have a look at the thing they call the grid, where the universities and educational departments are getting established, that is 10,000 times faster than the web because it's all fiber optic.
Right.
So when you think about being connected to something that's 10,000 times faster than what you have today, you think about the content and video-rich content that you can put down there and the accessibility. It's interesting, even like today with what we have. You watch the news today, the number of reports you'll get, say, from Libya or somewhere in the Middle East, it's all done off Skype or something like that.
Or a phone.
Or a phone.
Yeah. Let me take a quick break. We'll be right back. Hal Short's with us today. He is the president of the United Christian Broadcasters International, and we'll be right back.
Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove. Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove.
Well, we're delighted today to have in the studio with us Hal Short. He's the president of United Christian Broadcasters International, and at least twice a year, he's here at the Dove. And he travels the world 2 to 3 times a year and making sure that the mission of United Christian Broadcasters is being fulfilled in various countries. And what is the simplification of the mission of UCBI? The shortest version of it.
Basically, at the heart of what we do is to use local people who can talk to their community using the media to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ in a relevant way to right where those people are, to go to the people with a relevant message and in a way they understand.
That's wonderful.
And UCB International is a conglomerate of individual organizations. Each affiliate is autonomous. The international board is made up of people from those different affiliates.
There's our board. There's the illustrious
look at the fine fellows they are too. You and I are in there somewhere.
Somewhere.
And so we come together internationally to share, to strengthen each other, to share ideas, to share technology, and there's a lot of things. It's like a cooperative in many ways, where we collaborate and coordinate stuff together so we can strengthen each other.
All right, let's talk about Canada. You have work in Canada,
Yes.
and that was a hard birth.
It was hard. We're currently we have a station base up in Belleville, which is about 2 hours east of Toronto. We have another station down in Chatham, Kent area, a couple of hours the other way. We have some relay stations off that. It's proven to be quite a hard work in many ways, but again, the same process of using Canadians in the media to bring a message that to the Canadian people. It is a challenge. I mean,
well, Canada wasn't real friendly to radio. They had allowed Christian television in, but they weren't too friendly for radio for quite a while.
And it's quite difficult because they have some difficult laws. The CRTC, their authority there, requires a lot of local input, and so you can get a small town. I mean, we've got a license in the town of Coburg, and between Coburg, Port Hope, there's about 30,000 people, and they want origination, and so it suddenly becomes a very expensive model. You've got to find ways of getting around that, and so it is not as simple trying to broadcast on FM in Canada as it is in some places. It is hard. I mean, they're doing a good job, but it's not easy, and they are finding it hard going.
Now, I want to come back to the UK just for a moment, because it ends up being, you gave birth to that, some very humble beginnings, and today it has just emerged into being a huge force. You got 4 formats in radio. You got the UK, UCB UK TV, you're on DAB, you're on the internet, and single-handedly, it's the largest distributor of the Word for You today. That's quite a story there.
It is the largest of all the affiliates. And again, like New Zealand is only 4 million people. Britain, you got 60 million. So we always expected it to end up a lot bigger. You're right, it is the biggest of all the affiliates. But it took 20 years before we actually got those DAB licenses. Mm-hmm. So
20 years.
It wasn't something that happened quickly. We began broadcasting by getting airtime on Manx Radio on the Isle of Man between 10 o'clock at night and 1 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. And we used to have to buy the time. And that enables us to get broadcast back to some of the coastal places like Liverpool and that in the UK. It's been a very hard road, a very, very hard road.
But it's very successful now and growing and even reaching more. All right, I want to save a few minutes for this. You had this small, humble beginnings out of this little country called New Zealand. Real tiny little country, little radio station. You had this international version and vision to go all over the world where God was leading you to go. But you really had no interest in the United States. I mean, you looked over here, we have 15 of everything. Why come here?
Well, it's interesting. It is interesting. I remember years ago, and I've told you this, but years ago, the Lord showed me that we would be involved in the northwest corner of the U.S. And at the time, I said, why?
Yeah.
Like you said, you got 15 of everything.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
I could think of no good reason, because, in a sense, this is the birthplace of Christian broadcasting. Mm-hmm. And we'd worked originally in British Commonwealth countries. Then we moved into Asia and into Africa and Europe. But when the Lord spoke to me about coming into the northwest corner back then, I said, again, why? And I just put it on the shelf and forgot about it. And many years later, a certain individual by the name of Bob Gassner, well, the both of us, brought you and I together.
Yeah.
And out of that has grown this. And it really has become a fulfillment of something the Lord showed me probably 15, 20 years ago.
Really?
And I just know that is a fulfillment of what he showed me way back then. And
well, it's been said of all the places in the United States, the Pacific Northwest is the most unchurched, and yet we have these incredible like Bible Belt pockets throughout the Pacific Northwest, and our immediate vision is the Pacific Northwest, to take the programming and the format and the message we have and reach as many as we can in the Pacific Northwest. but it's been an amazing thing to watch with the television. I never thought we'd be. In fact, I gave up on TV. I thought, well, that's not for us. It's never going to happen. And then the license drops into our lap. But I want you to finish a few minutes we have left about the power of TV, because in America, we've watched it go full circle. We've watched it go from its beginning days to, in some ways, almost being, borderline goofy, to where it's now come around where it's a huge tool to impact lives, because so many people, for whatever reason, don't get out and they watch TV.
I think what we've got to remember, there is a change happening. Well, it's happened on how people receive information. You and I were brought up in those days of steam radio.
Yeah.
As a young fella, I used to get alongside my radio and I would listen to the radio serials.
You're right.
But then I'm an old buzzard, as they say. But I have found, even in myself, if I want information with pictures. Mm-hmm. And the generation that's coming through now, they want information with pictures. Mm-hmm. And so you need video-rich content. And we have to provide video material, which actually reaches the people. Not talking to them, but reaches them. They don't necessarily just want preaching. They want something that relates to their lives. They want something that relates to their situation. And so we've got to start thinking afresh of how we use television. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the problem. I look at I remember talking to the guys in the UK about TV. What's happened in the UK? UCB TV in the UK is now become one of 17 television channels on Sky.
It covers the whole nation.
Covers the whole nation.
Right.
They're one of 17. But it's a ghetto. And if you have a look at the different channels, they go from the good to the bad to the ugly. And some of the television content is terrible. Mm-hmm. And I look at it as a believer and say, I wouldn't watch that. I wouldn't, they wouldn't even convert my dog with the stuff they're showing. It's terrible. Why would a non-believer want to watch that stuff? Mm-hmm. It doesn't relate to them. And sometimes they're just asking for money. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're talking about stuff that's not relevant, and half the time people don't understand them. Mm-hmm. We have got to have content which actually meets the need. That is a challenge for us. Content that meets the need. Content that speaks to my situation, where I'm at. You have to minister into my issues, into my life, in a way that I understand that's going to touch me. Well,
I want to just quickly touch on that point. Since we've launched the Dove TV, and it was an incredible challenge. We got it on the air, saved the license, and all of those things. The first thing we had in the back of our mind was we just didn't want to look like the other channels. Not because that's all bad. It's just that there's so much of that. We really wanted to come on with a programming lineup that was really relevant. And this is where UCB came in, because with a cooperative effort of programming from the UK, New Zealand, and Australia, plus what we were able to obtain in the United States, and the exchange of that product, all 4 of those affiliates now around the world are having fresh content you don't see it on any other channel.
Exactly. And we are still developing it. And I think we will continue to develop it for some time, because there's a lot of work in producing content. Right. But we are always looking for fresh ways of bringing the gospel. And you're right. When you go to Europe, you go to Asia, you go to Oceania, you get fresh ideas. Mm-hmm. And so that is the benefit, I guess, of the cooperative that we have amongst our television affiliates, and that we are sharing information, ideas, and so it does bring new material in.
Hal, we only got about a minute and a half left. What's the future for UCB? What do you see God leading you as the leader of the pack?
I think I see our biggest impact is going to happen in the digital world. We've got to learn, how do we reach the millions and millions of people that are unreached today with the gospel? We can do it online. I think what's going to happen is that we're going to start looking at language groups So rather than say, like in the old analog model, we looked at countries. What we will look at now is language groups, whether it's Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin, Urdu, whatever the language, Hindi, whatever we're talking about, we'll look at language groups. We have a strong French affiliate in France. Well, they could become the hub. We'll have media hubs which deal with those language groups, and so they can begin to put material together for French-speaking people. Now, okay, in some of these language groups you have Castilian Spanish for Spain, but you've got Latino Spanish for this part of the world.
Mexican Spanish.
Yeah. So you can deal with those as well.
Right.
But I see us looking at language groups. You think about it. We don't have to go into China to literally reach millions of Chinese every day.
Well, Hal, it's been a delight to have you. And this is your first time on our television station, theDove, which is your television station and really the community television station. Look at that. They got a picture of me catching a fish in New Zealand off the boat that you took me fishing on. That's
well, as you can see, that's what happens when you go to the international board meetings.
If I can't catch men, I'll go catch fish. Hey, come back. We'll see you. You'll be back through here right after the first year, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks in England as we have our international board meeting.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank
and
you.
We'll see you tomorrow.